everybody, to another edition of Conspiracy Chronicles on April the 29th, 2012. I'm Joe Joseph, along with Tim Watts.
Hey, Joe.
Tonight we're going to go over the Oklahoma City bombing. And what better way to do that than to have Holland Vandennieuwenhof from A Noble Eye come on. But before we bring him on, isn't it amazing, Timmy, that here we have, we're going to talk about Oklahoma City tonight, and that the New York Times comes out with a piece today, terrorist plots hatched by the FBI. And, I'm not a big fan of the New York Slimes, but I will say that it's incredibly interesting, the timing, that this this article comes out. And it says the United States has been narrowly saved from lethal terrorist plots in recent years, or so it has seemed. A would-be suicide bomber was intercepted on his way to the Capitol. A scheme to bomb synagogues and shoot Stinger missiles at military aircraft was developed by men in Newburgh, New York. And a fanciful idea to fly explosive-laden model airplanes into the Pentagon and the Capitol. That was hatched in Massachusetts. But all these dramas were facilitated by the FBI, whose undercover agents and informers posed as terrorists, offering a dummy missile, fake C4 explosives, a disarmed suicide vest, and rudimentary training. Suspects naively play their parts until they were arrested. When an Oklahoma college student, Mohammed Osman Mohammed, wow, that's a great name, thought of using a car bomb to attack a festive Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Portland, the FBI provided a van loaded with 6 55-gallon drums of inert material, harmless blasting caps, a detonator cord, and a gallon of diesel fuel to make the van smell flammable. An undercover FBI agent even did the driving, with Mr. Mohammed in the passenger seat. To trigger the bomb, the student punched a number into his cell phone and got no boom, only a bust. Undercover operations, long practiced by the FBI, have become a mainstay of counterterrorism, and they have changed in response to the post-9/11 focus on prevention. Isn't that interesting, Tim? Almost like pre-crime of Minority Report, don't you think?
Well, this wouldn't be the first report. You remember there was, when was this back? Maybe a year or so ago, Paul Craig Roberts wrote a great article on global research. Why does the FBI orchestrate fake terror plots? And he goes through and lays it all out, about all of the ones that have happened most recently. It's all something these guys, they concocted, and it goes all the way back to 1993 to the World Trade Center bombing.
Absolutely right. And of course, these false flags, that they occur. And oftentimes you'll come to find out that the FBI and the CIA was intimately involved. And so with that said, tonight's focus is on Oklahoma City. One of the most important and yet most devastating, prior to 9/11, it was one of the most devastating attacks on American soil that we've ever experienced, especially on the continental U.S. It was.
Yep.
And the 1995 bombing in Oklahoma City was a direct blow to the heart of America. 168 people were killed, including 19 children. For those watching the nightly news, terrorism had come home. For years following the bombing, countless victims, family members, survivors, rescuers, and ordinary Americans have questioned the official accounts about that fateful day, hoping to shed light on answers long ignored and censored, both by prominent media outlets and the U.S. government. A Noble Lie peels back what we thought we knew about the bombing and its perpetrators. The film exposes information never before examined or brought to the attention of the American public. A Noble Lie is the culmination of years of research and documentation conducted by independent journalists, scholars, and ordinary citizens. Often risking their personal safety and sanity, they have gathered evidence which threatens to expose the startling reality of what exactly occurred at 9:02 a.m. on April 19th, 1995 in Oklahoma City. And we have the pleasure of having Holland Vandennieuwenhof on the broadcast. Holland, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for that wonderful intro.
Oh, man, it's fantastic. And folks, anoblelie.com is where I read that. That's the About section. And that's where you can go and see the short and long trailer of A Noble Lie and also purchase it. And I have to say, I was taken aback by it because, I mean, I knew there was so much more to Oklahoma City, but I'll be honest with you. I started probably my process of awakening in about 2005 is when I started to do that. And my focus has always been 9/11. Oklahoma City really never, there was the 93 World Trade Center bombing because I always focused on the World Trade Center, but I never really looked into Oklahoma City bombing until your movie came out. And I mean, it was an eye-opening experience to see, like, if you ask me, this was almost like a dry run. It just seemed to me like it was a dry run of a false flag, of a false flag to see if they could get away with it. You know what I mean? What made you want to look into this?
Well, I agree with you that 9/11 was definitely an expansion of the methodology tested and tried out in Oklahoma City, and they did learn many valuable lessons. Oklahoma City did serve its own purposes, and what they did get out of it and what they learned, they certainly applied at 9/11 with the same methodology and some of the same players, and certainly in its execution, and especially in the method of cover-up. They learned a lot about how they can manipulate the media, how to contain media leaks. But the reason I got into it was I'm from Oklahoma City. This is my hometown. This is where the film crew is from. And being awake and active, we felt that the story needed to be told, and it had not been properly told. It was scattered throughout the internet. And we wanted to present a cohesive package, so we decided that a documentary was the best way to do that. So we gathered enough talents and resources, and we put everything together. It took us about 2 years, and we were released in December of last year. So that's why we got into it.
Wow. Were you guys involved at all? Well, let me just say this, folks. One of the interesting things about this event that absolutely blew me away was the independent investigative resources that were brought to bear on this event. And it absolutely, I had no idea that the Oklahoma Bombing Investigative Committee actually existed until I saw your movie. And I mean, it was absolutely fabulous to see citizens come together. But I want to talk to you more about that when we come back from break. So folks, sit tight, don't go away. Conspiracy Chronicles returns in 3 minutes on the Orion Talk Radio.
Oh, I'm here. I forgot to unmute.
I do that quite often, actually. So the audience is used to it.
Okay. Well, back to your question. The Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee was founded shortly after the bombing by State Representative Charles Key. He had been approached by the family of his longtime secretary. She had recently taken a job in the Murrah building and was killed in the bombing. And Charles Key was approached by her family, asking him to look into some of these questions that were being raised about the bombing, especially the discrepancies in news coverage that was going on versus what the official story was pushing and what the government was saying was true and what was not. So Charles Key garnered the support of other survivors, witnesses, and local people in the community started raising funds. They actually raised, I believe, over $600,000 to pay for their efforts, to pay PIs, to pay attorneys, to pay for all their operating expenses. Everything was delineated and run very professionally. And they tried the proper civic, role that they were supposed to fulfill to achieve justice. They tried to get a grand jury formed, and despite all the obstacles thrown up, they finally got it formed. And then the grand jury was given over to the Oklahoma County DA, who had been an opponent of the grand jury and was now responsible for presenting evidence. So, of course, it was now his tool, and he turned the grand jury on the bombing committee. The bombing committee was found innocent, of course, because they had done nothing wrong, but the precedent was set. So you can see the correlations with 9/11, with how the victims trying to go through the properly approved channels to achieve justice and still being burned and still being left out in the cold.
Wow, that's fantastic. Timmy, I'm sure you're full of questions, so why don't you go ahead and fire off, shall you?
Well, first off, it's stunning film. Absolutely.
I mean,
Thank you.
mind blowing.
Yeah, congratulations, Holland. And I would encourage absolutely every one of you out there that, this is the
Absolutely.
best investment you're going to make. Go to enobleye.com, buy the movie, get this thing for your collection. And I tell you what, there's a lot of Oklahoma City video that's out there, but I tell you what, you brought a lot of new stuff to the table, Holland. Just an excellent presentation. So, folks, if you think you've seen everything, you haven't. These guys did just an excellent job on this. So many things about this, Holland, that correlates so well with 9/11. Everything from getting rid of evidence, as quick as they can, and kind of forgetting leads. It's interesting about the two Middle Eastern men, the blue jogging suits that were just kind of forgotten about, that jumped in the brown truck.
Well, everyone who saw McVeigh that morning saw him with other people. Everyone.
Exactly. So it's amazing that all this kind of stuff can kind of get washed away. So, what was your reaction as you waded through this? As you exposed all of this?
Well, it was, we would come across this evidence and find a way to present it, and it gives you an almost giddy feeling knowing that you're spiting the official story. You're disproving it with everything you do because it's so unimpeachable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking about, most of our witnesses are government employees. It was a federal building. We're talking to first responders and cops, investigators, people inside the building, eyewitnesses. So, and finding, videotape taken by law enforcement that shows them pulling C4 and other explosives out of the building. When you see this stuff and they deny it, we have the proof right here. So there's not a whole lot of things out there are more thrilling than being able to spite the government and show them that they're lying.
Yeah, and again, just like 9/11, so many things that were caught, by film. People were seeing things, that looked like explosive charges had been used, and immediately they make Ground Zero one of those places where you can't take pictures, and including, the fresh kill landfill, and so they're doing the same thing in Oklahoma City. It's amazing.
They sterilized the bombing site. A month after the bombing, they demolished the whole thing.
That's the one thing that I was just about to get to. You read my mind. I just can't believe that, they had armed guards, and when they buried the thing?
They buried the wreckage under armed guard, and then they later put a parking lot on top of it. So, there's no way to get in there and get the independent bombing analysis to find if there are traces of contact explosives on that material, because everything we're being told by rescuers and responders is that they swabbed the interior columns and they tested positive for C4 the day of the bombing. But there's no independent verification of that because the ATF buried those findings.
And they used again, I hate to use the word coincidence, the same demolition crew was used for Oklahoma City and for 9/11.
Controlled Demolition, Inc. Yes, same company.
Yeah, very highly, Joe, as you would say, coincidental, huh?
Yes, there's definitely some coincidence there, but as everybody knows, we don't believe in coincidences here at Freedom Link Radio. One thing that's interesting, and I hate to bring, I love to bring this kind of stuff up, but the occult, the occult plays a significant role in a lot of things that these powers that be do to execute their devious plans, and Bill Clinton, obviously, he's one of the top-notch devious dudes out there. And then, of course, there's a whole array of them. But one thing that's interesting is 9:02 a.m. The tower's blown up at 9:02 a.m. on a day, April 19th, that in occult lore, that's an occult date. 4/19/1995 is an occult date. But what's also interesting is that the second plane hits tower number 2 at 9:02 a.m. Here's another thing that's just is it coincidence? I think not. There certainly is an occult. There has to be an occult aspect here. Did you guys ever dive into that at all when you were looking into this?
Well, on our own time, yes. And I personally think that this twilight language that is used in these actions is how they communicate amongst themselves that these events are controlled and under control. So at the very least, I believe they use this timing to communicate with one another, and there very well may be a higher purpose to this blood sacrifice. Who knows? Those things are buried deep in their own writings and their own lore, so it's very possible.
This stuff never ceases to amaze me. I want to get into Terrence Yakey a little bit, because that really his story kind of sparked it all off for me in the movie. And one thing that I found interesting was what did he know what did he know when he goes to respond as a first responder that gets the feds so spooked that they kill him? And I mean, they kill him.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yes. Terrence Yakey was the first police officer to respond to the building. He was just a couple blocks away.
Hold that thought, Holland. Let's go to break, because our breaks are hard here. When we come back, we'll get into Terrence Yakey and what that means, what he meant to the Oklahoma City bombing, and consequently to your investigation and making a noble lie. Folks, we'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio's Conspiracy Chronicles on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Folks, we have so much good programming to offer here at the Orion Talk Radio Network, and one of our top shows is Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye. Of course, you guys probably all just heard that awesome interview with Judith Berry Baker.
Yeah, that was excellent.
Yeah, the 6-hour marathon interview. I mean, fantastic. But his show airs every Wednesday and Friday from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and again on Sunday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, right here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts, along with Holland Vandennieuwenhof tonight of ANobleLie.com and the movie A Noble Lie. And we were talking before the break about a first responder, Sergeant Terrence Yakey, an Oklahoma City police officer who was murdered. And then ends up the crime scene's destroyed, his house ransacked. You know, they say he goes to put stuff into storage, and when he's on the phone with his buddy, says, "Hey, man, yeah, I just got to shake the feds." I mean, what does he know, Holland, that he knows about these feds following him and doesn't? I mean, to me, that it just seems like he knows more than they want him to know, and he knows his life is in danger, but he kind of went about it the wrong way, don't you think?
Maybe afterthought dictates so. Terry Yakey was the first officer to respond, and according to what he told friends and families, that he saw a bunch of things there that morning that did not, they weren't congruent with the official story. He was telling his family that what they're saying is not true. He was a hero that day. I mean, let's talk about Terry Yakey, the person he was. He was a pillar of the community. He was the honor graduate from his police academy. He was a member of the DARE program, and I have talked to a couple of children who were children back then, who knew him as the big police. He was one of the largest officers on the force, and he would come to their classroom and tell them about the dangers of using drugs. And he was a real inspiration and father figure to many of these children. I mean, he was a outstanding human being, and he responded to the bombing. He saved 8 lives that day. And he worked in the building until he injured himself, hurt his back after falling into the rubble. And he was awarded the Medal of Valor, the department's highest award. Despite all these accolades, he was suffering from a campaign of harassment, intimidation, and persecution from within his own department, because he was questioning the official story, because he was compiling evidence, because he was talking to other first responders about what they had seen. And he had acquired, the word is that we have received is that he had acquired videotape, perhaps of some of the people who were standing outside the Murrah building when he pulled up. People who should not have been standing outside the Murrah building watching events uphold, certain federal agents that he knew of, or he was able to find their identities out later. And he had other evidence that he had stored in a safety deposit box that was raided by the FBI after his death. Without warrants, the bank just caved into the FBI, and they confiscated the contents of Yakey's safety deposit box. But when he died, a year after the bombing, it was ruled a suicide, despite the fact that he was basically he was leaving Oklahoma City. He was done with the department, tired of the intimidation. He was moving to Dallas, and they found his body, and his last words, as far as we know, were to one of his police officer partners, and he said, "Hey, I've got to shake these feds who are following me. I've got to deliver some stuff to mini storage, and we'll meet for dinner later." And he knew he was being followed by feds because he had been followed before. And his body was found the next morning by a deputy. The car was filled with blood. They found his body about a mile away on federal property outside the prison in El Reno, Oklahoma, outside Oklahoma City. He had a dozen wounds on his body. These wounds were packed with mud and grass as if he'd been dragged. He had handcuff marks on his wrists, a noose mark around his neck, and the cause of expiration was a bullet wound to the upper right portion of his skull that exited lower left jaw with no powder burns.
Right, almost execution style in a way.
He was on his knees.
Yeah.
Handcuffed, and he'd been dragged by a noose around his neck. And they ruled that this was a suicide. They performed no autopsy on the body, no ballistic tests on a shaky weapon that was found much later and farther away from the scene. And he was buried. I personally believe that Yakey would not be allowed to. He was leaving the department, and he was only a couple days away from receiving the Medal of Valor in a ceremony. He would have the eyes and ears of Oklahoma pointed at him, and he was going to give a speech, I think, that he could not be allowed to give because he had nothing to lose. And the documents that were in the back of his car that he was delivering in mini storage, when the deputy found the car, those documents were in there. He reported this in his report. When that car was later processed for evidence by the FBI, those documents disappeared.
Of course.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Wow, what a story! That of all the stories, you know, in that thing, that one really hits home in the movie. And folks, again, you know, enobleye.com, a great video. You definitely want to check this out. You know, again, like 9/11, I'll keep saying this all day. So many different things that are so similar. But one of the things that kills me is the number of people that weren't in that building, including the ATF specifically, that these guys were tipped off on their pagers to stay away, and yet they leave these little kids who are under 6 years old in a daycare center to die.
Yes. The funny thing about the bombing was that it supposedly was targeted at the ATF. It was on the two-year anniversary of Waco on April 19th, 1993. So in 1995, Tim McVeigh, according to the official story, targeted the Murrah building because the ATF office was there. But the ATF office was empty. And in fact, we show affidavits from first responders talking about the fact that they were talking to ATF agents on the scene who told them that they had been tipped by their pagers to not come into work. Some of the agents actually later concocted stories, which we disprove in a noble lie. One agent said he was in a free-falling elevator. Well, we interviewed the elevator mechanics. They say there was no one in the elevators, and the elevators did not free fall. They testified this same thing before a grand jury, and of course they were ignored. One agent claimed that he was trapped in the building and broke his way out heroically and rescued several people, but of course there's no one to corroborate any of that. And we have videotape of this agent, Luke Franey, outside the building minutes after the bombing, and he is not disheveled. He is not covered with sheetrock dust like everyone else who was inside the building, and he is not sporting the bandage that he would have on his hand a couple days later as he was telling his story. In fact, he's holding a bottle of water with one hand and shaking hands with the head of the bomb squad with the other. So he's a liar. So that... Yeah, so I mean, they received a warning. They were told not to be in the building, but everyone else in the building was not given that warning.
Holland, why that building? I mean, with a daycare center in it, why Oklahoma City?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me for the ultimate truth on Oklahoma City, I don't have it. But what I can say is that the Murrah building was relatively insecure. It was not under 24-hour armed guard. Many of the cameras were dummy cameras. There's relatively easy access after hours on the street. Oklahoma, I mean, this is pre-9/11 in Oklahoma City. There was no major concern towards terrorist activity. Oklahoma City kind of brought that realization home, and 9/11 slammed it home. But it was an easy target. And also, We interview police officer Craig Roberts. He was retained by the FBI to help in the investigation. He quit their investigation once he realized the FBI was lying to him. But he was receiving calls from federal agents in Little Rock, Arkansas, who were telling him that the documents from the Whitewater case and the Mena, Arkansas drug smuggling ring that was being run by the Clintons while they were the governor of Arkansas, all of those documents had been moved to the Murrah building when they went to D.C. to assume the presidency. And we interview V.Z. Lawton and others, and actually Oklahoma City Police Officer Don Browning. And he was told by an FBI agent that the rescue was being called off while people were bleeding inside until documents, quote, so important to the government that they would not, until they were recovered, no more rescue would be performed. There were FBI agents all over downtown Oklahoma City picking up pieces of paper all day and confiscating them. They were very concerned about the documents for some reason.
Yeah, I think that's your answer right there in a nutshell. The fact that those papers were stored there. And again, like 9/11, in Building 7, so many things that were, that dealt with the California energy scandal and a lot of SEC investigations and the Enron scandal. And there's always a paper trail, no pun intended.
Yeah, there is. And again, here we have the Clintons, who are known what do you call them, Tim?
Scumbags?
Okay, scumbags. Let's go with that. Yeah, players, baby, players. Yeah, and they are certainly players in this, especially if what we have in Oklahoma City is very similar. Again, another similarity between Oklahoma City and 9/11. Folks, last segment of hour number 1 coming up. We have so much more to talk about with Holland Vandennieuwenhof of A Noble Lie. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages.
We should have done
Don't forget, immediately after this broadcast of Conspiracy Chronicles, the Information Nation with Ken kicks off here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. So make sure you keep that dial tuned to Orion Talk Radio for some of the best talk radio out there on the internet. We're joined by Holland Vandennieuwenhof of A Noble Lie. That's anoblelie.com. That's where you can get the DVD. And I highly recommend it to everybody. If you haven't seen it, you got to watch it. And if anything, you got to spread the word, because this right here in and of itself is a very important story that needs to be told. Especially, we were talking during the break, Holland, and you had said that it's not as, people aren't as scared to dive into Oklahoma City as they are about 9/11, and that's a pretty important, that's pretty important to understand.
Well, I mean, human beings are not totally governed by pure cold logic, and I'm not quite sure if the world would be a better place if they were. I don't know. But, I mean, the evidence with Oklahoma City and 9/11 is pretty decisive on the side of a covert false flag operation. But even the weight of that evidence with the 9/11, people are afraid to look at it. They can't view that evidence in an objective manner because it scares them. And they're still scared of a possible event like 9/11 happening again. But Oklahoma City was 17 years ago, and it's somewhat removed from this current paradigm of Islamic terrorism. So people can look at that evidence in an objective manner. And the evidence is so overwhelming that the government is lying about every aspect of the bombing. So when they can see that, and then they realize that the government is capable of lying and covering up mass murder possibly carried out by organs supposedly under our control, maybe, hopefully, they can follow those implications forward towards 9/11 and see that it's not totally implausible that the same criminal cabal capable of psychopathic behavior and covering its tracks can also, once they get away with it, graduate to a higher level of false flag terrorism, inflict much more mass murder to much better results for them.
Do you think that they could get away with another attack like this? Do you think that the public is coming around now to the point where if another one was to happen on in the United States, that it wouldn't raise like major alarm bells I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, thank you. That's a very good question, actually. And in that article that you posted talking about, and you were talking about earlier, talking about the long series of FBI stings that have been going on, where they kind of pick up these no account guys on jihadist websites and talk them into waging war, and then set them up and give them money, and then give them a fake bomb, and then arrest them. That's demonstrated on a small level of what they can get away with so far under very tightly controlled circumstances where there's no outside purview into what they're doing. This is all strictly undercover work. There's not a whole lot of large consequences that draws outside scrutiny. That's what they're sticking with for now, because I can tell you this, they would have a really hard time in this age of information dissemination of pulling off something as sloppy as Oklahoma City. And when people say, oh, the government, they could never pull off something as, intricate and well-planned, as perfect as Oklahoma City and 9/11, these operations, they were screw-ups from the beginning. Not that that was the ultimate answer, but there were large screw-ups in both operations. Building 7 with 9/11, I think, was a tremendous screw-up.
Absolutely.
With Oklahoma City, yeah, you're right. With Oklahoma City, there were screw-ups left and right, especially in the cover-up and how things get away from them. But they can always rely upon the mainstream media to not pursue these ends for a variety of reasons. And that's why they would be hard-pressed to do this. So they either have to gain control of the alternative media through the internet, or it has to be something so big and so scary that there's no time or inclination to look further than the official story. So it's kind of limiting their options, but they're not great options either way.
Timmy, go ahead.
There's a guy. There's so many interesting characters involved in this story. But one of them, the minute I heard his name, Holland, I right away I'm like, oh my gosh, MK Ultra, and that's of course Dr. Jolly West. When you see that guy, I mean, what a rat bastard. When you see his name sneak into a story, now you're into it.
That made me sick, by the way, when I saw that name. I mean, the first thing that Timmy and I think we both said it at the same time, like, mind control. Oh.
Yep. Well, there are even some things about that we couldn't include in the movie for basically time reasons. I mean, we could have gone off on 19 different tangents with this and explored them to their very interesting ends, but it would not have fulfilled the purpose of the narrative, what we were trying to do. But one of those aspects was the possible use of mind control on Tim McVeigh. And the fact is that the first alarm bell on this was the fact that he was treated by Dr. Jolyon West. Now, Dr. Jolyon West has a kind of a two-pronged influence on American society and media. On one hand, he was kind of the go-to guy for every mass murderer and lone nut crazy person who made major headlines. He treated Sirhan, Jack Ruby, Patty Hearst. He was consulted by the FBI for Waco and gave a lot of sound bites to the media for Waco and actually wrote on Waco a lot. But he was also one of the largest MK Ultra contractors under the CIA's mind control program. He was receiving mind control MK Ultra funding for decades at the University of Oklahoma in the 1960s, and later he moved on to UCLA as head of their Department of Psychiatry, conducting MK Ultra experiments. He was finally basically forced out of that position when a lot of that started coming out. And he was consulted by the defense for McVeigh, and he was actually recommended his own protege to directly treat McVeigh, a Dr. John Smith. Now, Dr. John Smith, after treating McVeigh, later moved on and became chief of psychiatry at Guantanamo Bay, which is an admitted mind control laboratory. So you see the influence on this and possibly McVeigh. And one thing we couldn't go into the movie was the large amount of medical and dental visits that McVeigh had while he was in the military. Our co-writer, Wendy Painting, discovered this in the Defense Archives, that McVeigh was, according to the medical records while he was in the military, a very sick man. But he reports no health problems. No one reports any health problems. There wasn't any explainable missing time. But he was going to the doctor and dentist hundreds of times for questionable surgeries. Some of these were cosmetic surgeries. And they never released his full medical, military, and not any of his psychological record, and none of his special forces records. So he was going through something weird. And it possibly was mind control.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the special forces. In the movie, it says, he was in there, 2 days? And then he went back, dejected to his troop, but is still alleged to have been involved all along?
Yeah, he was actually pulled out of the right after the Gulf War. He was actually still stationed in the desert in the Gulf War, and they pulled him out, which is kind of unusual to go through on a special forces qualification. And apparently, on a 5-mile march, he developed a blister and said that he couldn't continue anymore.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, before this, McVeigh had been Mr. Super Soldier. By all accounts, he was the perfect soldier, doing push-ups and studying while the other soldiers were going out to bars and picking up chicks. And then all of a sudden he comes back from special forces training and he's Mr. Bummer and he doesn't want to continue in the Army. But he told his family that he was recruited for covert operations. He told his first set of attorneys that he had been recruited out of the Army to infiltrate neo-Nazi activities in the Army. He told Terry Nichols, the only convicted accomplice, that he was working undercover for the FBI. So it appears that he was recruited in this time frame to work undercover for the government.
Wow. That's pretty,
I mean, this is just
pretty heavy stuff.
I had to pick up my jaw off the floor.
Well, it's when I saw that he was in there for only a couple of days and then right back out again. And then, then when you see the Jolly West connection, you go, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now you see that there's probably something that's going on behind
And Jolly West, and this is actually something that we're pursuing presently. Jolly West was actually brought into Oklahoma City the day of to help treat first responders and victims with their memories.
Really?
Yes. So he was actually actively involved in trying to find out what people had seen, discrediting them, and trying to convince them they had seen something else. And we have actually, we have confirmed this firsthand that he was involved with that.
And then he does that little Jedi mind thing where he waves his hand and says, "You didn't see anything."
Is it that or the Men in Black stick thing?
Yeah. The thing, flash them, they forget everything. That's incredible. Then did he help with the defense team too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Some of these people still remember. So it wasn't exactly a Men in Black stick. Some of these people know what happened.
Yeah.
Wow, what a traumatic day. And I mean, there's so much more to get into here, and we're coming up against the top of the hour. And Holland, I mean, the work you did on this DVD is just fantastic. I'll tell you what, it's something that I'm going to definitely suggest to anybody out there that is looking to wake up family members or friends. I mean, if you look at works, there's a lot of people hear 9/11 was an inside job, and boom, it automatically turns them off. And this right here, you said it earlier that there's a certain scare factor with 9/11 that there isn't with Oklahoma City. But as far as definitive works are concerned, in a hard-hitting documentary, this has to be probably the best documentary into something that the powers that be have done that I've seen to date, and one that certainly is beneficial to helping wake people up. Folks, hour number 1 is done. Hour number 2 is on the way. So much more to talk about. So when we come back, Holland, you do a radio broadcast. So give people a little more background on your radio broadcast and where they can go and listen to you. You'd have to unmute, though, first.
Of course. I knew that. Yes, myself and director James Lane and our editor, Austin Green, we've been in radio for years, and we kind of took a break during the movie-making process because we really had to concentrate on getting the movie out. By the end of last year was our goal, and we made it. And we finally got back on the air on Free Mind Report, which you can check out at freemindreport.com. And it plays on Monday nights, 6 to 8 Central. And we're on a number of low-power FMs throughout the country, including Austin and Oklahoma City, and, of course, online also. And this week's guest, this Monday, is actually going to be Roger Charles, Colonel Roger Charles. He just released a book called Oklahoma City, What the Investigation Missed and Why It Matters. Roger Charles was a consultant to ABC when they made their 2020 segment on prior knowledge in regards to Oklahoma City, talking about the ATF not being in the building, lying about the elevators, about the bomb squad across the street 2 hours before the bombing. And this segment proved so popular that ABC produced another show on Oklahoma City. And Roger Charles sat down to watch it come on TV, and it never did. They played a rerun. So he called up his bosses. He's like, hey, what's going on? And they said, well, we got a series of calls from the Justice Department, and we agreed to drop the show. After that, Roger Charles started working for the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee. And his latest efforts culminated in this book just released on April 24th called Oklahoma City. You can find it on Amazon. I just read it. It took me about 2 days, but I was just sucking up the information. It's kind of like a book orgasm to me. And he really gets into the story, and we'll have him on the show this Monday to talk about some of the things that he's discovered. And Roger Charles has a lot of access to government employees. He's a longtime insider. He's from military intelligence. He's been reporting in D.C. for decades. So he was able to talk to some of these retired federal and intelligence operatives who are now free to talk about what they know about the bombing. Now, they're no longer on the clock and worried about their careers or their pension. They're basically almost untouchable, and they're willing to talk. So there's some really good information in that book, and we'll be talking about that this Monday.
Fantastic. I tell you what, the one thing about this, about the documentary, at the end of it, they talk about this being a sting gone wrong. And I guess my question to you is, why, if it's a sting, do they use C4, like real C4, and not inert explosives? You know what I mean? So many times, it's just like that New York Times article talks about how they always set up these, quote, extremists, by providing them dummy missiles or dummy bombs and the training and all that. But why the real thing this time?
Well, there's several competing theories to the ultimate truth about Oklahoma City. One of them is that it was a more mainstream view, is that it was a sting operation that went bad, went awry, and it literally blew up in their face. And now they're in cover your ass mode because their fingerprints are all over it, although that was not the desired outcome. And there is a body of evidence to support that, including the testimony of State Representative Charles Key, who was told by a U.S. Senate staffer to one of the senators from Oklahoma, who told him that they had been briefed, the Senate delegation had been briefed, that the Oklahoma City bombing was the result of a sting operation that went bad. Now, I don't see these two theories as being in competition with one another, because I believe the method of execution was the sting operation. This is how they moved assets in place. This is how they provided the explosives. And this is how they get everyone involved in the cover-up. It's not that the street agents who are involved in this operation are covering up the fact that a covert faction blew up the building. They're covering up the fact is what they think is their operation that blew up in their face, because it was their bombs, their informants, it was their truck. And now they have to cover themselves because there's no way they can go to the American people and explain to themselves that this was just a tragic mistake on their part. That's just not going to happen.
Well, it's the same thing that happened in '93 too, with the World Trade Center bombing.
Yes.
And again, a Ryder truck. Ryder seems to be the choice of government
even more so.
Bomb something.
Even more so, the Ryder truck in Oklahoma City was supposed to park inside the parking garage underneath the building. In fact, that's why the Ryder truck was seen driving back and forth in front of the Murrah building all morning, was because they suddenly realized that the truck did not make the height clearances to get into the parking garage. Once again, a screw up.
How do you like that? Wow.
And had that bomb exploded in the parking garage, it would have been much harder to explain the anomalous damage within the Murrah building. Much
Absolutely.
harder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, would you say that it could have taken the Murrah building down if that was in the parking garage?
Well, that bomb would have done much more damage because all its force would have been contained inside the Murrah building. None of it would have been expended on the remaining in the air. It all would have been contained within the Murrah building. And the explosives inside the building that were found later on, and when they had gone off, if they had gone off properly, which they didn't, the whole building, yes, was supposed to come down. Just like in '93 when they wanted those doofuses to park it next to a support column, but they forgot to. Yep. And therefore I don't even know if that would have brought the building down in '93, but it certainly could have been plausible. But it certainly would have been more plausible in Oklahoma City. And because of that screw up, we can look at that evidence and prove that that truck bomb did not do the damage to the Murrah building.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you could also say that the lethality of the attack would have probably been much more or much higher.
Oh yeah.
Had that truck been able to get down into the parking garage.
Well,
right?
had it gone off according to plan, and had the explosives that failed to go off there, because there were several bombs found inside the building after the fact, and then this caused evacuations. And there were first responders who saw columns strapped with explosives, and I can't get too much into that because people are at risk. But yes, people who were there saw the columns strapped, and if those had gone off, the whole building would have come down, and much been harder to explain. It's certainly much more plausible, but they can rely upon the mainstream media to not get into that.
Well, it's an excellent point on the screw up with not being able to get the truck inside, because as you pointed out, that now really kind of opens up the door for everybody to really, get a really good look at this and see that, everything was blown away from the building. It wasn't blown back into the building, so something in the building actually blew away, but yeah, here's this truck that's still parked outside.
And you talk about scripts. There's so much of this that was scripted, like just the sting operation itself. And this was not in the movie, but we tracked down some of the people that were supposed accomplices with McVeigh. And these people had been approached by McVeigh before the bombing, and had basically ignored him, stayed away from him because they felt he was a government informant for a variety of reasons. These people were also being approached by government informants who they knew for a fact were ATF informants, trying to talk them into bombing a federal building with a Ryder truck, with ANFO and diesel fuel, Tovex boosters, the same formula that played out in Oklahoma City. There were ATF informants shopping this around to people in the neo-Nazi and far-right movement before the bombing. They were shopping this script around, and not a whole lot of people were biting. Some people did bite, but the whole thing was scripted. The fact that things were blown out from the building found across the street against the blast wave of the truck bomb. I've talked to first responders on the scene about the fact that there was paperwork and rubble from inside the Murrah building across the street, and they were told that was because some weird whirlwind from the truck bomb had gone into the lobby and shot straight up and blown everything out.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's ludicrous, but I was trying to figure out where this came from. Well, if the truck bomb had been underneath the building, that certainly would have been plausible, and so they were following the script as much as they could.
Let me get your opinion on something after the break. One thing that I would love to get your opinion on is why do people buy into the stories? That's the one thing that I really want to get into, and we just kind of don't have time to really get into it before we go to break. So that's one thing that I'd really like to know.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so important to understand, you can trust the government. Hey, the government has your best interest at heart.
Well, it's the freaking media, and KFR, there's the TV station. That's one we should talk about after the break.
Absolutely. And we'll do that, folks, coming up in 3 minutes. So don't go away. Sit tight. This is Freedom Link Radio's Conspiracy Chronicles on the Orion Talk Radio Network. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. What a fantastic conversation we're having tonight with Holland Vandennieuwenhof of A Noble Lie. That's anoblelie.com. All I can say is get that DVD, folks. Get it.
Yeah.
Fantastic information.
Cloudy day.
And we're
This
talking about
lightning program was alluded to by Professor Salter at these conferences just recently.
What the
So we're
heck
gonna
is
pick up
that?
where we left
okay.
off.
Well, we got some audio going in the background there.
We have a disembodied voice.
Yes, very disembodied. Yes, something else is going on. But I was talking about a sting gone wrong, and in the documentary they talk about that. But why wouldn't they use inert explosive if it was a sting gone wrong?
Yes, because the information we've developed is that the building was supposed to blow up in the middle of the night. It was supposed to be a large publicity stunt for the ATF and the FBI on the anniversary of Waco to demonstrate the danger of the far right and the need to go after them. That's what they thought they were achieving. and something went wrong. We know that they were looking for the truck that morning. They felt that the operation had got out of their control. There were people seen with in federal uniform with radio transponders in Oklahoma City on high ground, frantically using their equipment, trying to find something. This was described by a PI who was driving by. He recognized this equipment and what they were doing. He came forward to the bombing committee and told them about what he had seen. The bomb squad showed up at the courthouse 2 hours before the bombing and may have actually gone inside the Murrah building also, according to some eyewitnesses. So the people on the ground who were plotting this late night publicity stunt, the truck didn't show. And now they have a truck driving around with a bomb in it, and they don't know where it's going. And then all of a sudden, it pulls up to the Murrah building. Explosives go off inside the Murrah building. About 10 seconds later, the truck bomb goes off, according to eyewitnesses and the seismographic record. And people who heard the explosion, they heard two. And now they are dealing with a huge mess on their hands, and cover-up mode is in full effect.
Wow. Now, I guess the plan, you say the plan was for this to go on during the night. So they were going to execute. Right. They were going to execute this anyway.
Yes.
And that was directly because of the fact that all that paperwork from the Clintons was housed in the Murrah building?
I think more than likely that was just a side benefit that the paper was there. It was probably supposed to be a publicity incident. And what I'm saying is that it's not that the wily targets of the sting operation somehow turned it on their federal handlers. Is that whoever was Roger Charles actually enunciated this beautifully once. He said, "For every white op, there's a black op." And what they did was they took this existing sting operation, this covert faction, saw and probably executed this sting operation as cover for the deeper agenda of blowing up the building in the middle of the day and causing a large body count. And there was supposed to be a large frame-up of the far right after the bombing because they released phone records implicating many accomplices, supposed accomplices to McVeigh. But the fact is they screwed up the frame-up. One of these men was Johnny Bangeter. And they actually put the wrong Johnny Bangeter on the phone records. They put Johnny Bangeter Sr. on the phone records, which later turned out to be forged, as confirmed by the defense investigator whom I interviewed. In fact, when he found out that the phone records were forged, he turned white as a sheet, and he realized it was now a national security issue. He didn't realize it up until that point, that there was a frame-up involved, that they screwed that up also. So in the end, they could only blame it on the spirit of right-wing paranoia and on dissent itself.
Now, knowing that the government has pulled stuff off like this, like we could talk about the 93 bombing or the fact that, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was, admitted that, yeah, okay, we did it. Or how about USS Liberty or Operation Northwoods?
Lusitania.
Right, Lusitania, the Maine. Why is it that people are so quick to believe official stories?
Well, I think it's because, for one, we are trained that good citizens have trust in the institutions that supposedly protect us. That being a good citizen means upholding these institutions and tolerating a certain level of imperfection, not realizing that it's deep-seated corruption. And it's psychological also. When people are told things with authority, they accept them as more true than told things without authority, despite the evidence. I mean, you can have. I mean, if the government had come forward and told the truth about Oklahoma City, people would believe that also, just because it was the government. But because the government is telling this, and the mainstream media is telling them this, it's seen as acceptable behavior. Not believing these things is not acceptable behavior. And only non-sanctioned, non-sponsored people must be crazy for thinking this way. But when you talk to people and present them evidence, and here's the thing, here's how you can overcome that. And this is psychological. When people are confronted with evidence that's against the mainstream from at least two independent sources not related to each other, from people talking on the street, from seeing a piece of evidence, they now realize it's okay to think this way, that it's not crazy, that it's not just this one person, there's more. and then you can gain a critical mass. This has been proven in psychological studies. When people are confronted with two independent sources that are against the mainstream, they are more inclined to believe this information and view it objectively.
Timmy, what do you got to add to this?
You know, it just, God, I've got a gazillion questions, you know, and again, it's just like 9/11. There's so many things right in the front if you just take a look at it, folks. And that's the problem. People are just too afraid to take a look, because once they dive in and they take a look, I mean, again, the average layman can look at this thing and connect the dots and go, my God, you know, there's something that's really not right here. And then, you know, you've got, you know, guys like FBI officer Frederick Whitehurst, who, you know, talks about, he gives testimony that the FBI basically obfuscates the whole investigation.
They lied. Whitehurst turned whistleblower over this, and 93. He saw they were lying about 93, and then when he saw what was going on with Oklahoma City, he resigned in disgust because he had seen that nothing had changed. And he testified on the stand that they lied about the finding of ammonium nitrate crystals in the bombing evidence, that there's no way to prove that ANFO was used because there's no discernible evidence that says ANFO was used. He was the chemist looking at the evidence under a microscope, and the original finding was that there was no evidence of ANFO. He testified under the stand that a fellow chemist changed the findings after meeting with federal prosecutors. So they sculpted the story to fit the prosecution.
Yeah.
Now I got a question for you, Holland, and wouldn't you think, now, you know, you're a mainstream, say just hypothetically, you're a mainstream media guy, right? Wouldn't you think that this stuff would make great news? Wouldn't you think it would get ratings? Wouldn't you think that it, I mean, so what the heck's the holdup? What's the hang up?
Well, this is the price the mainstream media is going to pay for not adhering to the truth, is that they're largely becoming obsolete. That is true. People are paying less and less attention because they will not do this. But the media is controlled. In fact, per Oklahoma City, we find out through FOIA requests that a producer in ABC was a confidential FBI informant leaking information about their investigation, whom they were interviewing, telling the FBI everything they were doing. This guy is now head of DC operations for CBS. So, I mean, they control the media in a large amount of ways. Timmy brought up KFR TV on the break.
Yep.
Local news here in Oklahoma City was reporting on this stuff, reporting on John Doe number 2. They named John number 2 by name through a witness identification, using private investigators and police officers working on their own time to find the truth. A year after the bombing, KFR TV is purchased by the New York Times Broadcasting Company. The programming director is let go, the lead journalist is let go, and all reporting, contrary to the official story, vanishes.
Isn't that coincidence?
Yet again, more coincidence, folks. This show's flying by quicker than you know what. But boy, I'll tell you, the information, folks, valuable. We'll be right back after these messages, so don't... Folks, Orion Talk Radio is actually running a promotion right now. You donate $20 to the network, you get a free Orion Talk Radio t-shirt. I mean, how cool is that? How many networks out there give you a free t-shirt for $20? I mean, it's awesome. So hit that chip in button, donate $20, get your free t-shirt today, and spread the word about Orion Talk Radio. We're here with Holland Vandennieuwenhof of AnobleLie.com. And Timmy, where do we go from here, man? I mean, the last half hour of the show, and there's still so much to talk about.
Oh, you know, yeah. Holland and I must have like 4 pages of notes on this. It's just, it's interesting, you know, how fast that they moved on this whole thing once it got going. I mean, the whole thing was like wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, like 3-week trial. Wasn't that it?
Yeah, a 3-week trial. I mean, and we kind of contrasted it with the OJ trial that happened at the same time, which lasted a year. But for the trial of Tim McVeigh, it lasted a mere 3 weeks. And if you go into the trial evidence, you saw how the case was manipulated from the beginning. And in fact, you brought up, I think on break, the fingerprints. Yes. We show this in the movie that the FBI collected 1,034 fingerprints during the course of the investigation. An FBI representative admitted during the trial that none of these had been run through the fingerprint identification system. Now, if I have to go to jail on a bad speeding ticket, they're going to run my prints through the NCIS or NCIC, whatever it's called. But they didn't do it with the suspects, with the prints they collected in the Oklahoma City bombing investigation. And during the trial, a lot of the family members of victims were really harping on this. And Kathy Wilburn, who lost her 2 grandchildren, she was told by FBI agent John Hersley before he took the stand that the FBI would run the prints after trial. Once they had established the guilt of McVeigh and Nichols, they would run the prints to find other conspirators. Those prints have never been run. In fact, they have never even been checked to see how many are replicating one another. They just took the prints and literally sat on them.
Wow. And to me, that, sounds more like they're hiding prints. They know that there's prints there that can be identified. They don't want them to be identified, so they're not going to look.
Exactly. I mean, okay, who are these other people? Who are they? Okay, if they're innocent, let's establish that. If they might be guilty, let's establish that. But they will not even allow the identities of these people who left prints at the crime scene, at the places where McVeigh was, where he was seen meeting with other people. They will not run these prints. And that tells you they are not interested in finding out who these people were. And I can tell you that the reason they are not, because most of these people were government informants.
Right. And you'd think, Tim and Holland, that the government would want to find out the truth about this. But I guess when they're intimately involved in it, that that would be the case. But it goes against everything that a civil servant is sworn to do. I mean, you take an oath, for God's sake, to support and defend the Constitution, to against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I mean, but here we are, and our government is actually the terrorist. And that's the thing, is that this whole war on terror is a sham. It's an absolute sham.
Yep.
And my thing is why? How did we, as the American people, Holland, let it get to this point? In your opinion?
A slow, steady corruption in our institutions that we allowed. We allowed a little dirt in the beginning. We thought it was tolerable. Well, nothing's perfect. We'll allow a little corruption to exist. We'll allow certain people to get away with these things because it's not worth the effort for whatever reason. And they escape consequences, and they spread their psychopathy throughout the institutions they infect until it gets to the point where it's too late. I mean, we're pretty much at the point where it's too late for reform, because people have tried reform, but the institutions they're trying to reform are controlled by a certain clique of cabal of psychopathic individuals who use these institutions to spread their psychopathy, exert their influence, preserve their position. This is why we called it a noble lie. That's from Plato's Republic. A noble lie is a myth or untruth told by the elite to preserve social harmony in their eyes and the position of the elite. A lie told for what they call the greater good. The FBI is a paramilitary organization. Its agents follow orders. They're used to keeping their mouth shut and averting their gaze when they see something going on. When you read the investigative notes in the 302s, the witness statements that these FBI agents were putting together, you realize that these guys had no idea what they were doing. They're not asking the right questions. They're not pursuing. They're told to collect this report. They type it up. They turn it in. Then they accept their next assignment. That's what they do. If they go outside that, they don't get promoted. They lose their job. Their career's in jeopardy. So they do what they're told. And the FBI has long been an institution dedicated to preserving the institutional elite in this country. That's their track record. That's their primary job. So, but people have come forward. People have talked. The FBI Crime Lab supervisor, David Whitehurst, talked. We have cops talking. We have all kinds of people talking, state representatives, people involved in the investigation. People are talking, but they're not given a platform by the media to voice their point of view.
Yeah. And you made a good point about this being a small cabal, because one of the points I was trying to make when Joe was talking there was the fact that, we talk about the government. And I always think we have to back up, for a second when we're talking about the government, because, again, government is such a huge, vast, a sea of people that, and you hit the nail right on the head. It is a cabal. And so folks, you got to remember that when you think about this. People say, our government would never do anything like that. Well, certain people within the government would. Unscrupulous people, crap seems to float to the top, folks. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. And when they get into positions of power,
Yeah.
Well, that's how you can pull off things like Oklahoma City and 9/11 and the anthrax attacks, and you can hide the whole damn thing under the media rug.
And the fact is, the covert arm of this government has been doing these things like Oklahoma City overseas for decades.
Oh,
to
yeah.
applause. They've been bombing, causing instability, putting strongmen in power, causing untold amounts of pain and death overseas. Why would they not bring the same methodology home? Look at Operation Gladio in Europe and Italy in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where it's admitted that the CIA was involved in destabilization programs, a strategy of tension. I mean, the Italian Senate implicated the CIA in the Bologna train bombing station that killed 89 people to blame it on the Marxist right in Italy, I mean, the Marxist left in Italy, and ensure that the Christian Democrats would stay in power. They have been doing this stuff for decades without accountability, with applause. They get promoted when they do this stuff. Why would they not bring the war home?
Yep.
You know, we were talking about last Sunday, Holland, we were talking about the Act of 1871 that established the United States, the corporation, here in the United States, where the organic Constitution goes by the wayside, and now the second Constitution that was written as the Act of 1871 comes into play and is in power. And one of the things that, if you look at the history of this, and it's something that Tim and I are researching right now, is that there was kind of like this three arms of the corporation, where you have the United States, that's the military wing of this scumbag corporation, and then you've got the financial arm of it, which is Britain, and then you have the quote spiritual arm, which is the Vatican, and they all kind of play in cahoots together. But what's interesting in this research that we've done is that they always refer to the United States as being the military arm, the strong arm for their world, their the New World Order plan, I guess you could say. And I mean, we are everywhere. No matter where you go, no matter what country, we have a presence there. And we've manipulated so much, whether it be elections or it be, like you say, the people in power. Folks, I mean, Libya is still fresh in everybody's mind. Here you have Gaddafi, who brought water to the desert. Now, he was no saint, don't get me wrong, but he certainly didn't deserve the fate that he did, getting gang-style execution, in the desert, running for his life. I mean, he had surrendered. But the fact is that if you look at all of these events, the shadow arm of our government is intimately involved in every aspect. And it's chilling when it actually comes to our own soil. I mean,
yes.
Go ahead, Holland.
It's a historical trend. We're witnessing the criminalization of the state, where criminals achieve positions of power within the state and point the guns of the state at their political enemies, and call them enemies, call them criminals. I mean, this is what we're witnessing. It happened in the Roman Empire. It's happening in all of the empires, where corruption becomes so endemic, so tolerated, that it becomes the rule of law. Corruption literally becomes the rule of law, and only those who play ball rise to high position. Look at Eric Holder, Attorney General of the United States. He was instrumental in the cover-up of Oklahoma City back when he was Assistant Attorney General. Instrumental. He is now He's now Attorney General, responsible for Operation Fast and Furious. And those memos have come out from the FBI, actually from the federal prosecutor.
Oh, Lord, if you want some great radio to listen to during the day, check out The Edge with John Stokes, Monday through Friday, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on Orion Talk Radio. It's Conspiracy Chronicles Night tonight with Joe Joseph, Tim Watson. We've got as our special guest Holland Vandennieuwenhof from the film A Noble Lie, about the Oklahoma City bombing. And folks, again, it's just a must-have. I can't tell you. I've seen a lot of films on Oklahoma City. And I watched this one, and I actually picked up new stuff. Just excellent job by Holland. And, you got cut off by the break there before. So finish your thought there, Holland, and then we'll talk about the grand jury.
Yeah, we're discussing how these people move up in this cabal of criminality. And one of those examples is Eric Holder, who's now Attorney General of the United States. Well, he played a pivotal role as Assistant Attorney General back in 1997, 98, of covering up the Oklahoma City bombing. And now we know that he was the architect and initiator of Operation Fast and Furious, which has killed 2,000 Mexican citizens and 3 U.S. law enforcement officers. They were running guns to Mexico to fuel drug violence, to justify a gun control agenda. And this is proven by the emails that came out of the Phoenix prosecutor's office where they're saying they're going to use the gun violence in Mexico to call for more gun control restrictions, specifically on the number of long guns one can purchase in 1 month. So this is an admitted FBI internal memo, federal prosecutor's memo, where they talk about using a false flag operation, running guns to Mexican drug cartels to kill people to justify a politically driven agenda. This is a false flag attack. It should be making more headlines right now. Eric Holder is facing a contempt of order, actually an order of contempt from Congress at latest rumor, but he still has his job. And he's now Attorney General of the United States. And we see, because we tolerated Oklahoma City, this is a microcosm. We tolerated Oklahoma City. Here's an example. Now we have a larger death toll from Fast and Furious.
Absolutely. Tim, I mean, how important is that? Do you see how this one event, and I mean, this can be said about many events, but do you see how this one event has allowed almost like a chain reaction to take place?
Well, I'm quite certain that, the powers that be have had, guys like Jolly West and them talk to them about what events like this are going to do to the general populace before they even pull them off. I think they totally know exactly what they're getting when they do these things.
Oh, yeah.
Again, 9/11 similarities, Holland. So much stuff covered up in 9/11, like hiding all the surveillance video in New York and especially in Washington, D.C. Also not letting the 9/11 Commission, letting all the commissioners see the evidence. And the same thing, happened in Oklahoma City. You had people that weren't allowed to ask questions, to see the video of that Ryder truck being parked. It seems like the same old story, same old script.
Well, yeah, it's the same old thing. I mean, no one's ever seen the video of the truck pulling up to the Murrah building and whoever was driving it and what happened at the Murrah building to cause that destruction. They'll never release that tape. We get into that in the movie and how that came about through the murder of Kenny Trentadue. But, it's the same thing. And we were talking a little off break about Jamie Gorelick, one of these other players. Jamie Gorelick was also an assistant attorney general under Clinton during the bombing. She was actually the point person in Oklahoma City for the Justice Department, guiding the investigation, guiding the prosecution. And Jamie Gorelick was also the author of the infamous Wall Memo that separated domestic intelligence gathering from foreign intelligence gathering that was used as an excuse as to why they could not follow the 9/11 hijackers around. This memo was written a month before Oklahoma City. Jamie Gorelick was later on the executive commission of the so-called independent 9/11 commission, and one of only a handful of members allowed to view top secret evidence. So you see the same players involved in Oklahoma City, 9/11, and the cover-up and the execution and everything.
And she also happens to be a big CFR member. And I think, that as we were talking, there were like half a dozen of those 10 members on that commission were CFR members. Mm-hmm. So, when you mentioned that Jamie Gorelick was involved on the ground in Oklahoma City, that set a red flag off for me. So, amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And then the fact that the DOJ intimidated the grand jury member.
Hoppy Heidelberg.
Yes, exactly. Incredible.
Yeah, Hoppy Heidelberg was called for the grand jury to indict Tim McVeigh, Terry Nichols, and others unknown. He was a standing grand jury. They were given the case. He'd already been selected. And Hoppy Heidelberg was a pillar of the community. He was president of the Oklahoma Horse Breeding Association, a member of Mensa. People kind of underestimated him because of his country drawl, but he was a very successful horse breeder and businessman. And he started demanding, as his rights as a grand juror demand and subpoena evidence, demanding the videotapes, demanding expert bombing experts to come forward. He demanded the floor out, the layout and the floor plans for the Murrah building. They could not answer any of these questions, so they actually dismissed him without cause and started intimidating him. The FBI actually came to his house and displayed a firearm to scare him into playing ball. But Hoppy Heidelberg did not back down, and he kept on talking to the media about the corruption he had seen in the jury room, how the federal prosecutors were guiding the investigation in one direction only, how those who asked questions were intimidated. So all of these, the same thing with, 9/11 with the grand jury that was thwarted in its efforts. You see the citizens trying to do these things within their institutions to achieve justice and getting burned every step of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's another, I said you brought some new stuff that I hadn't heard before. And one of the things was about the fact, you know, that if it was really an ammonia bomb was responsible, people wouldn't have been able to approach that scene for a while.
The signature of an ammonium nitrate explosion, and ammonium nitrate is a fertilizer that's commonly available, still is. And the signature of that, when you combine it with diesel fuel and provide a proper booster and so forth, and it makes a low explosion, not a high explosive, it's actually a low explosive, is a ammonium nitrate cloud. It's a toxic cloud. In fact, the first poison gas developed in World War I was ammonia gas. And had that been an ammonium nitrate bomb, as the official story dictates, downtown Oklahoma City would have been enveloped in a poisonous cloud that would have impeded rescue efforts and probably killed a good number of the survivors and first responders. This did not happen. A few people do report the smell of burnt ammonia nitrate. This just indicates that there was ammonium nitrate in the truck that somehow caught fire or was part, but it certainly was not the cause of the major explosion from the truck, because there would have been tremendous casualties from seared lungs, and there was none.
And you had people also talking about smelling a lot of, you know, a high degree of sulfur in the air.
Sulfur and cordite.
Yes,
also
military explosives.
And these were military people reporting this, people who worked in the recruiter's office. They smelled cordite and sulfur. And there was, some people did respond, did say that there was a smell of ammonium nitrate also, but certainly not to the extent that there would be if that had been an ammonium nitrate bomb.
Yeah, and the same thing that, you know, we had with 9/11 again, with the Pentagon. You know, people come outside and they're smelling cordite and explosives. So incredible, the similarities that are there. And, you know, and then again, the building debris was all buried, under a parking lot? I wonder if anybody's ever thought about exhuming, you know, remains and stuff. I mean, everything with 9/11, excuse me?
That parking lot's now police property.
Yeah, how convenient. Very nice.
They actually do their driver training on it.
Oh, sure. Wow. Buried under armed guard and now under a police parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. You know, you mentioned real quick Kenny Trenton. That was also another one of those stories that in your movie that was just quite compelling. The guy he was killed actually in jail.
He was murdered in federal custody because the FBI thought he was John Doe number 2. Now, remember, the FBI says John Doe number 2 never existed, but they believed it for a time to the point they were willing to kill a man. As it turns out, it was a case of mistaken identity. Kenny Trenton fit a profile of a man they were looking for named Richard Lee Guthrie, who was a conspirator to Tim McVeigh and who himself later wound up suicided in his jail cell, as the guy across the cell from Kenny Trenton later, Alden Gillis Baker. He started talking about the FBI team going in there in the interrogation and hearing the sounds of a beating taking place. He was later suicided in his cell. But because of that, Jesse Trenton, his brother, an attorney from Salt Lake City, started pursuing Oklahoma City, finding out why they killed his brother. It was a case of mistaken identity, but because of that, he's been able to get a lot of information out through FOIA requests showing that government informants were surrounding McVeigh before and in and around the time of the bombing, that they should have known that Tim McVeigh was going to bomb the Murrah building. He was named by name. He was named by name. He was fingered as a suspect before the bombing. They were watching him. For some reason, they don't stop him.
And he thought he was an undercover agent at the time. McVeigh actually thought he was helping out then.
Well, you know, who knows what he thought? I don't know. And we're not saying he wasn't guilty. He was guilty, but he wasn't the mastermind. He was a tool. Everyone I've talked to who knew him says that he was a complete tool, incapable of independent action, but he would do whatever you told him to do. I talked to his roommate in the Army, the guy who was in the war with him, in the tank with him. You don't get much closer to someone than that. He said he was a complete tool.
Wow. Guys, we're out of time. But, Holland, it was fantastic having you on the broadcast. And there's so many other questions to ask. I mean, we'd love to have you back on the broadcast soon so we can talk about this some more, man. It's fantastic. Folks, coming up on Tuesday, Michael Badnarik joins the broadcast. You know, we were talking about Representative Charles Keyes. Well, Michael Badnarik, of course, 2004 Libertarian presidential candidate. He'll be joining the show. He just, not too long ago, taught his Constitution class in the Oklahoma State House.
Yeah, Charles Key was there. Charles Key's actually now running for county clerk in Oklahoma County, and we also have someone running for sheriff who's a Ron Paul guy named Darrell Searles with very good credentials. So, I mean, things could really turn around here in Oklahoma County. We could really get some truth going. And if Charles Key is elected county clerk, man, that would be great.
So refreshing. Folks, that's the broadcast for this evening. So again, next broadcast Tuesday evening from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Michael Bednarik joins the broadcast. Can't miss it, folks. Can't miss it. Until then, thanks, Holland, for dropping by tonight.
It's been great.
Visit ennobleeye.com. Folks, get that DVD. It's fantastic. Until then, I'm Joe Joseph. Have a pleasant evening, everybody.
Holland, thanks